SiteLink, Florence Healthcare's industry-first connected research platform, helps sponsors, CROs, and sites eliminate fragmented workflows. Link to any site, anywhere. Learn more at connectedresearch.com.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Kenlon, Senior Vice President at EnsembleIQ and publisher of Drugstore News. Welcome to our ongoing series of Q&As with leading retail pharmacy executives and how they are transforming retail pharmacy into a healthcare destination. So today we have with us Ramita Tandon, who is Walgreens Chief Clinical Trials Officer. Welcome, Ramita.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So there's been a lot of news lately about clinical trials at retail. Meeting the patient where they are, whether it's virtually, in person, hybrid. With that in mind, why is it the right time for Walgreens to launch clinical trials?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you, John, for having me here today and the opportunity to talk about clinical trials here at Walgreens. It's an exciting time for us as we've launched this new business here at Walgreens. And it really fundamentally is aimed at changing the paradigm for our patients' experience and the connectivity of care that patients have if they participate in clinical trials. For those of us, that have been in the space for a very long time, the clinical trials model today, as it stands, is very much antiquated and is in its crisis. Nearly 80% of trials fail to meet their enrollment goals in set timeframes, and that oftentimes contributes to billions of dollars in delays every year. Now, we have a statistic that was really recently published by the FDA that only 5% of the US population participates in clinical research, and nearly 3/4 of that cohort are white. So that in itself demands change, and it demands a call to action whereby we at Walgreens believe that we can certainly leverage our pharmacy presence that's across the nation, coupled with our vast foundation of real-world insights that we have on our patients and consumers, and of course our enterprise-wide health capabilities that we have across the organization, and create and pioneer, what we believe is a solution that's going to make clinical trials more accessible, convenient, and hopefully more equitable across the nation. Now, we launched the clinical trials business just to provide another healthcare offering into our local communities, particularly with patients with complex or chronic conditions in their treatment journey. And so we believe this service will allow our local communities, particularly communities of color and underserved communities, an opportunity to learn more about clinical research.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about the 8,000 plus stores that you have, add in Village MT, Alliance RX, now CareCentric, Shields Health Solution, and more. You're everywhere, so you can reach that diverse population that you're talking about. All right. So what's the Walgreens model for conducting trials? And this is sort of a long question. So what's the model? How is it different from an academic hospital model, which you sort of touched upon? And finally, how do you get patients to participate?
It's a good question. I think as we think about the Walgreens clinical trials model, it's an extension of the broader Walgreens healthcare solution that we're building out as an organization, particularly as we're creating more consumer-centric solutions into our local communities. And from a clinical trials perspective, our goal is to bring in technology, leverage personal connection, and offer a flexible set of capabilities that will allow us to transform how we design and execute clinical trials. We have definitely kept the patient security, privacy at the forefront of everything we do. So as we think about in our design and our execution, patient privacy and security is certainly top front of how we operationalize our business model. But as I think about just the core and essence of our clinical trials business, it's really around tackling some of the core issues that have been plaguing the industry, particularly around access, how to find patients, the right patients for trials. And once we find them, how do we retain those patients through the clinical trial experience and the workflow? And then finally, how do we engage the patients that makes sense to them and personalized in the communities that they belong to? And so for us, the overall clinical trials delivery model is about enhancing the patient experience and improving the overall convenience for a patient to participate. So we've created 3 service lines as part of this clinical trials business. The first is around what we call insights-driven patient recruitment. And what that means is, obviously at Walgreens, we have an extensive reach and access across the nation, but more importantly, we understand who our patients are. We sit on a lot of information on our patients that will enable us to really understand who those patients are, their disease conditions, their treatment journeys, that will allow us to be more proactive to identify patients for trials. Today in the industry, most of the times we use what's called passive recruitment channels, where we sometimes have to call the providers, put the burden on providers or study coordinators to go find patients, or simply using advertising channels or other passive recruitment means to find patients. In our service model, it's about leveraging our understanding of our patient population, using technology to mine the foundation in a way that will allow us to find those right patients, either by gender, race, socioeconomic status, and by location. And so we believe not only are we finding the right patients for trials, but the time that it saves for us to find those patients in relatively short order versus what's happening in the industry could be very beneficial for the industry and for the patient populations that are eligible for trials. The other service line that's critical in this business model is around bringing trials to patients. So today, most of the time, trials require for patients to travel or have ton of barriers that oftentimes is not helpful for patients to participate. At Walgreens, we really believe our desire to reduce the barriers that hold back patients to participate. And our goal is to be able to leverage our physical footprint as an opportunity for patients to come into our locations and have clinical trial visits conducted. So what that means is, 78% of the US population is within 5 miles of a Walgreens. We have created a very rigorous and compliant framework within our business model that allows our patients to utilize their physical footprint as a clinical trial site to get services done, whether it's screening, diagnostic, or even phlebotomy services as part of the clinical trial protocol. We also have the ability to digitize some of that workflow as well. So we call hybrid. And what that means is that we can bring patients to our locations and or aspects of the workflow can be done at a patient's home. So whether it's consenting a patient to participate in a clinical trial, having a telehealth chat with a patient for a clinical trial visit, we have elements of that workflow that is digitized and again, affords convenience for that patient to participate. And then also, finally, we have aspects of our clinical trial services that can be delivered at a patient's homes. We know that, parts of healthcare can be delivered at home, and we've seen it during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we want to make sure that if a clinical trial protocol warrants for patients and services that can be done at home, we can offer that through obviously our investments with CareCentrix. And finally, we have a very rich, what I call the real world evidence engine within Walgreens. And again, not only does that help to identify patients that are suitable for trials, but it has a number of utility for a number of use cases, particularly as you start to understand the patient journey, the retrospective analysis that can be done through this RW engine that we have, and the all types of analysis and informatics that we can drive and derive for research purposes, or simply understanding the qualitative and quantitative information on the patient's journey.
So you talked a lot about the challenges getting the patient to get involved, to recruit. I was going to ask, what are some of the challenges once the trials are started? But you sort of already answered that, I think, because of the at-home component and how you're moving towards that hybrid model and utilizing technology, especially, I guess, through CareCentrix. Is there anything else on the challenges that you think you could face once they've already started?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many structural and clinical barriers that serve as reasons why patients don't participate. And they're, some are very personalized, some are very applicable to the various communities that they belong to. But, and it can stem from all the way from identifying the patient, all the way to engagement, and even to the final phases of closeout of a clinical trial. And we've seen all that during, the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were trying to bring patients along in the understanding of why the vaccines were so important for their overall health. But, the one statistic that I didn't mention early on was that, 70% of our patients live more than 2 hours from the closest clinical research site. So if you think about the clinical research enterprise that exists today, that's a huge barrier for a lot of patients to want to sign up and say, yep, I want to join a clinical trial. And so for us and my team specifically, we have a tremendous, and I think a very exciting opportunity ahead of us to really change that paradigm by creating a model that's really centered around the patients and their needs. Very hyper-personalized in our approach as we start to bring clinical trials into these communities. And instead of having them go to a clinic, leverage our physical footprint as a mechanism for them to come in to get some of the services done.
Yeah, I think we know how tough it is to get people to be compliant when it just comes to taking their medicines. Now imagine telling them they have to go 2 hours to be compliant in a trial. I mean, I can't imagine that. Oh, that's great.
Always a challenge. Always a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think the other challenge that we've seen, and I think, the good news is the FDA recently put some guidance around the need for us to increase racial and ethnic diversity in trials. I think, John, I mentioned earlier, less than 5% of the US population participates in clinical research. And of that cohort, 3/4 are Caucasian male, right? So we have significant need to make clinical trials, and the therapies that are out there today, it's got to be more representative of the US population.
Especially to be more accurate, right?
Yeah.
No, that makes total sense to me. So talk about any partnerships that you may have formed to help execute. This is a big undertaking. I know, look, Walgreens is a huge company with plenty of resources, but you can't do it alone. Can you?
No. Listen, I mean, I think it's going to take a village in this, broader healthcare ecosystem to kind of crack the juggernaut when we talk about, issues around access, diversity, equity, and trying to reduce the barriers of participation. But we, since we've launched in June, we've been in several conversations with a number of pharmaceutical companies about their research needs and how Walgreens can help them. Each is very unique, each is very different depending on the objectives of their overall company strategy or the specifics of a particular trial. I think each of the manufacturers understand that we have a diverse range of patients. We have a trusted community presence that I think is extremely invaluable to these organizations, because they recognize the trust that we have in these communities can allow us to educate and empower them, for them to understand the value clinical research can have for their overall health, but more importantly, drive the messaging around clinical trials being viewed as a care option. And so I think as we talk to manufacturers and we hit home with the number of, flexible set of options that we have as we deliver clinical trials in these local communities, it's an exciting prospects for each of these manufacturers to leverage these capabilities and start to be able to advance the objectives either from a company perspective or for their specific clinical trials. In addition, from a technology perspective, particularly around real-world evidence, we've certainly partnered with a company called Pluto Health. Their platform certainly has enabled us to access medical records and access them very quickly. So if you think about, a patient and understanding not only the pharmacy record, but also their clinical treatment journey and putting it together, you have a pretty powerful viewpoint holistically of the patient's journey to start to make decisions on, number one, are they the right match for a clinical trial? How best to engage that patient just based on their treatment journey alone? And how best to, once they finish a clinical trial, how do we carry forward their care continuum so that they're not lost in the shuffle once a trial concludes?
That makes so much sense. And the company certainly softened the ground with the way it handled COVID, test and treat. And I think the way that patients view retail pharmacy and Walgreens specifically has evolved, and it's evolved very quickly. I mean, I got my COVID shot at the Walgreens down on Main Street in my town on Long Island. And I would never imagine going back to a hospital or a doctor's office for a shot like that. Why should I? It took me 10 minutes. So
yeah.
I think this is a logical progression. Yeah. So listen, before you go, can you give us a look around the corner? Like what does the future hold for drug trials at Walgreens? And are there any potential disease states where you think Walgreens could get involved?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, my goal is really to, move the needle around that less than 5% of, the US population participates in clinical research. And I think that's a huge venture in itself, as we look to increase participation in clinical trials, we will leverage our full breadth of our digital and our physical assets as we partner with manufacturing, companies to ensure that we ultimately create a great experience for our patients, but bring forth convenience so that they can participate, whether it's at our locations, at their homes, or sort of a hybrid scenario. So for me, what's very important is that clinical trials, while it's a research path, and it's a way for us to get into these underserved communities, into the overall healthcare ecosystem, but it also we want to make sure that we're driving the message that, clinical trials is certainly a care option, a viable care option for their health, particularly if the standard care of therapy is not available. So we're very passionate, as we work to execute against this business model. And it aligns well with our core values here at Walgreens as we think about, being courageous, as a retailer venturing into this clinical research enterprise. We're very connected into our local communities and leveraging that connection. We're committed to make sure that we bring forth new research, cutting edge therapies and opportunities into these communities. And finally, curious. We want to make sure that, we're constantly moving the needle, challenging the status quo, and bringing forth a delivery model that makes sense into our local communities. So we believe more to come. This is just the start as we've just launched, and we hope to do more as we continue to roll out the clinical trials offering into our communities.
Yeah, well, listen, the passion's coming through, and you're well positioned. It's what you're doing is equitable, it's accessible, it's affordable, it's convenient, it's high quality. I know I read your bio. I know you have the credentials. You've been doing this for 25 years. So we look forward to having another conversation once you've had a go of this. Thank you so much, Ramita Tandon, Walgreens Chief Clinical Trials Officer. Thank you for doing this, and please come back.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Be well.